it's time to talk about something very essential for every single one of us, for humanity, for civilization, for the continuance of life. And that is something called truth. Now, this concept is very unusual because what is truth is not necessarily what is a social norm. And if you look at history, if you look at humanity, you look at the nature of people, you see that the rise and falls of all civilizations are all attributed to humanity's relationship, our attitude towards truth. Because truth is the vital force of life. Truth is continuance, truth is eternal. And our relationship with the eternal determines our own immortality. You heard the story from eons ago of the rishis who lived thousands and thousands of years. And you look at us today, 70, 80, 90, if we make it that far. You see civilizations with technologies and philosophies and things that even now, with all of our advancements in science and medicine and technology, it seems like we are just suddenly apprehending the true depth and wisdom that these civilizations had long before we came along. Truth. When you look at us today, you see it seems like almost everything is falling apart. You see our environment is so full of toxicity. Our environment is degrading at a rapid pace. You see the toxicity in our food, our soil. We can't produce any crops without any kind of chemicals, fungicides, weedicides, fertilizers, anything at all. It seems like plants have even lost the ability to absorb nutrients from the soil, which has made even our sources of food nutrient deficient. Even in the best practices, the best methods we know to produce quality food still lacks that inherent vitality, that inherent nutrition, that inherent life force that sustains us. You see what's very prevalent even in the United States, in our government and in society, this sense of deception that's constantly being unfolded. You see the confusion amongst the masses. You see so much hostility towards each other. You see so much confusion. You see so much mental restlessness, anxiety, and depression. All of these things that are the crises of today, they're so prevalent, so tumultuous, and so seemingly difficult to overcome that a majority of people have lost hope. And they've lost faith. I've told all of you about the role that the enlightened, especially very certain enlightened beings, play in revolutionizing humanity, in pivoting us in a new direction, changing the trajectory of society, of technology, of everything as we know it. These beings, once in a while, they come along after many, many, many years where we have fallen so far off the path of truth that they're here to pull society up by its roots, upend everything we know, upend the underpinnings of science, technology, medicine, perception, humanity, everything as we know it, challenge our entire relationship to truth, to life, and restore the Dharma, Sanatana Dharma, the true teachings of the divine, the eternal, the everlasting. And you often see, society really sometimes becomes hostile towards these people because this being challenges their perception of reality itself. Everything is thrown into the fire. Everything is challenged. Everything is questioned. So humanity collectively feels as if life itself is being threatened because everything that we've known to be life is all pulled into question. It's pulled into the light. And when things are challenged, when things are confusing, when we lose sight of what we thought things were and things begin to change, we start to develop a sense of fear because whatever we were able to apprehend about truth is suddenly not true anymore. And so the mind rationally can only react in one way, and that is with fear. And fear breeds hostility. You see this even with science, with all of these scientists that have come with major breakthroughs before. All of them treated with such hostility by their own scientific community, seekers of objectivity and truth and, unbiased perspectives. And yet these people have been massacred publicly, politically, emotionally, mentally, physically. And we've come so far from this truth because, as we've discussed before, this huge division that lies between religion and spirituality and science. No one for the longest time ever could see the two integrating so perfectly together. There is always this idea amongst scientists and religious figureheads alike. Both of them agree that science cannot prove anything that lies in the subjectivity or in the realm of spirituality and religion. This is an untouched part of human life that science can never question. And because science can never question, science cannot apprehend it or measure it, it ends up dismissing it altogether. But if you look at the purpose, the function of science, right? In fact, there was a time in which religion and science did work together. Religion used science to apprehend the natural truths, the divine laws. And it wasn't until religion started to question these natural truths that science was simply revealing. And when religion started to reject them because it went against the paradigm of the time or the ambitions of the religious leaders of the time, and they saw them potentially losing control, what did they do? They reacted with hostility, rejecting the truth instead of changing its attitude towards that truth. So even though it started long before Galileo, it wasn't really until that time where Galileo was able to prove, right, through the telescope, that we are not, in fact, the center of the universe. The sun is the center of at least our solar system. We revolve around the sun. We are not so important after all. And religion's inability to integrate this truth with its teachings, to understand, to comprehend, to maybe reassess our relationship with what we think is true. We just denied it altogether. And so this pivotal moment created this huge divide between the two. And now you see in our modern day and age, the new religion of humanity, the thing that we rely on, the thing that we go for answers, the place that we find purpose, that we seek solutions, that we seek for our mental peace, that we look for in terms of ways of living and perceiving life, all comes down to science as the new religion of this world. Because all of us have an inherent pull towards truth. And when we sense something is deceptive, that something is not fully acknowledging that truth, it creates a block between us and that deception. We feel an abrasiveness between the two, between our own inherent nature and the thing that we're trying to reconcile with. And because of this disconnect, naturally, it's understandable that we have pulled away from religion, from these figureheads that have abused the blind faith of so many people, who have deceived, who have discredited things that are so blatantly and obviously true and right and correct that it makes us question the very foundation of those religious institutions. It's totally understandable as to why people have turned away from religion. Science has provided us with so much outcome because of its acknowledgement of these vital truths, of these natural laws that it observes, these natural laws that have allowed us to develop such significant advancements in our technology, in our science, in our medicine, right? And we're able to perform surgeries. We have so many treatments for things, antibiotics, we have AC, internet, we have so many advancements that we've come to think that, yes, this is, how could you not accept science? How could you not trust it? Right? We don't question the temperature that water boils because we have such reliance upon the scientific foundation behind it. Right? Someone else has done it before us, and science has created such an institution that we don't need to test things ourselves anymore. We can rely on the testings of others that have come before us. And in a way, this also creates problems. Because what is evolution in consciousness without testing ourselves? Science is one droplet from an ocean. You can take that droplet, look at all of its components, look at the structure, the nature of it, measure it, analyze it, look at its molecules, look at all the ingredients within it, and through that, you get a picture of the world. The problem is, because of this division between religion and science, our picture of the world is just this droplet of water, because this droplet of water has separated itself from this vastness of this ocean to the point in which we look at this droplet unaware, because we have not established a scientific or strong connection between that droplet and that ocean. And without that reference, without establishing that connection, even just on a scientific principle, on a scientific level, right? Our understanding, our capacity, our limitations are set. And they're skewed. Even with the most objective and sincere scientists out there, if they have not established that connection, we cannot truly understand the nature of that droplet of water, no matter what we observe about it. no matter what we can measure, no matter what we can validate about its existence, until we can truly say that, yes, this comes from the ocean. What does this say about the ocean? Science, its function is to measure the vastness of God's creation, its vastness, not its smallness. And so our attitude towards this truth, or lack thereof, is the root cause, the stem, the seed of all of these problems we see today. It's science's inability to address mental health. It's science's inability to produce quality crops, to alter the nutrient content, to alter our environment, to remove toxicity and restore or regenerate our environment, our agriculture, our air, life. We've reached capacity of that droplet of water. We've measured many things about it. We've studied it. We've made many advancements within that little sphere. And now we've reached the outer edge of that sphere, that surface tension that surrounds that droplet, that separates it. That ceiling, that limitation. And as we all know, what our science has established, right? Divine Connection International, right? This scientific foundation that we've created between that droplet of water and that vast ocean shows that this consciousness this divine grace is the entirety of that ocean. And from that ocean, that is the force that sustains us, that controls and governs us, that gives us life, that creates our lives, that creates perception, that creates the mind and the body, not the other way around. It is not what we do with our bodies and our minds that creates wellness, that creates vitality, that creates life, but rather what this source of life does for us. This pure consciousness is able to establish. The more its presence exists in this world, the more vitality reigns supreme over our lives. But our disconnect from that vital truth disconnects us from wellness. It disconnects us from life itself. We've lost touch, and you see, we're suffering for it. This is why I love Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophical statement, right? That God is dead and we have killed him. And people put it on t-shirts and they act like they know what that means. And it's not a statement really about God or whether God is actually dead or if we should believe in God. It really is a separate concept from God and the nature of God itself, but it's more to do with our relationship with God. And what he was trying to say is that when you remove God from society, everything that we've built, everything that has led us to innovation, to progress, that has created our moral and ethical standards as a society, as beings, that's established our government, that's established, right? Everything we see as a society, as a civilization, has all at one point in time in the past been firmly established in the existence of a divine authority, of God. And through this decline in our trust and our connection to that authority, our society, our civilization is going to crumble and fall without it unless we recreate our society. We change the underpinnings of society itself. We change civilization. We change the direction of life where we're headed. Without changing that, without changing our relationship to life, our society, our civilization will fall. It will fail us again and again and again. Progress will cease. And then you pair that with Viktor Frankl, his teachings when he was living in those concentration camps, held hostage by the Nazis. That the one thing that drives us, that keeps us alive, is not power, it's not ambition, it is really nothing else but purpose, because that is what he observed, that when everything, all of those other factors that philosophers beforehand have theorized, sustains us, drives us, moves us, right? These people in these concentration camps, they were left with none of those things. They were left without even a name. They had no clothes, they had no status, they had no direction by which to achieve or want or do anything. There was no power struggle, there was nothing left. And the one thing that determined the life and vitality, the longevity of the people that were able to live longer than the others was one factor and one alone, and that was purpose. Purpose outside of personal gain. And when he finally was released from that concentration camp and he started working, practicing psychology again, and he started seeing the nature of people and humanity outside, people who did not go through a concentration camp, who didn't have that severity of suffering in their lives. But he saw a new, different kind of suffering that humanity was facing. And that type of suffering was a lack of purpose. And he saw this epidemic manifesting, or this pandemic manifesting into a sense of boredom. People didn't know what to do with their lives. People didn't have a direction to go in. And the fact that his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he said he was shocked with its success. Because what it told him, he wasn't proud or happy about the success of his book and his philosophical teachings. But rather, it pointed out to a deeper suffering that humanity was facing. That the sole cause of the success of his book was pointing towards this huge void, this huge absence of purpose in people's lives that drove them in hordes in search for meaning. Because the nature of humanity, we see this in all the different religious teachings, that the one thing that drives us is desire. You can't have life without desire. The question is, what do we desire? Where are our desires pulling us to? When we remove this vital part of human existence, this divine authority, this consciousness, this divine grace, and we no longer acknowledge it as truth or as an objective reality, we limit it up to a personal experience, and then naturally we dismiss it from the institution that we rely upon for our well-being and our livelihoods and our advancement as a society, as a civilization. And we fall into the thresholds of desire. We start to see that our desires, inherently, they devolve into something far less spiritual, far more materialistic, far more superficial in nature. Because I said before, consciousness is always moving. There's nothing in life that doesn't move and change. And so if you're not moving forward, what's happening? You're moving backward. You're regressing. You do not stay still. You do not stay the same. And amongst the principles and foundational properties of energy is that energy is either gained or lost. consciousness is either gained or lost. And our attitude and relationship towards truth is what determines our gain in energy and our loss in energy. This loss of consciousness is the loss of our vitality. It is the loss of our good health and our peace of mind. We might continue to evolve technologically, but is that the real barometer of advancement as a species? If we use our technology to demean and control and kill and threaten? People are terrified of AI, not because AI is inherently bad, but rather we know as a species how we treat species that we perceive to be weaker than us. And we think if AI evolves beyond us, how will AI treat us? We're fully aware of the darkness that exists in human nature because it's so prevalent today. And because of its prevalence, we see that more in ourselves than the light. And so even our attitude towards ourselves starts to change. And we see the darkness more, and the more things that we see, the more we rely upon those things. I was hearing someone tell a story about what it's like to work as an associate in a particular type of store. And these sales associates, right, they don't work on commission, but they do get credit for those sales. And based upon how much credit they get determines how many hours they work that week or that month. So the more sales that they accrue, the more hours they have. And because the environment of that store prioritized and valued personal gain over truth, and that determines success in life. You saw deception rise to wild proportions, so much so that even the innocent that started to work in these stores would end up taking credit after a while because they realized that was the only way they could survive. That was the only way they could get more hours, is if they took credit from other people, other sales associates. They plugged in their own personal number to get that sale, just so that they could have more hours to work. And when we're not aligned with these divine truths, these divine principles, like where did this concept of this success just leave and go to another store? But the desire to work in that store was so strong because that was the barometer of success. It was a luxury brand. It was perceived as something high and mighty and significant in their lives that everybody wanted to work there. And because of the masses wanting to work there, people were disposable. So there was no value of truth anymore. Even when someone did speak up on the behalf of truth, nobody cared. Because it wasn't an appreciated value. It wasn't something that contributed to success. It wasn't something that contributed to the store, to the brand. It had lost its value. Well, this is just a very small example, a small anecdote for a much bigger story that we see in society and humanity. That when we are not established in God, in the Almighty, in the doer, in the achiever, Our consciousness gets trapped in the functioning of the ego mind, the self. And this self, it only knows how to compare. It conceives or hallucinates a reality based upon what it experiences. And without this knowledge, with this disconnect of truth, and with its lack of importance as a society, there is no value in it in establishing or nurturing it or cultivating that truth. And so naturally, our values devolve as a species, and our characters become hindered, they become squandered, they become less important, less than. And the awareness of nature, the vital truth of consciousness, of awareness, whatever we focus on, we become. Whatever we put value upon, right? The direction our awareness goes, awareness is the greatest discharger of energy. So if we're concerned with these components in our lives that we do not have an order, that is so chaotically arranged, and we have not found a way to see the deeper truth behind it, and we're still struggling for survival, and we only have methods of comparison instead of apprehending truth, right? We compare with the relative realities that we see around us that other people have put on display, and we become influenced by that. And upon that influence, our characters start to devolve and change. Where now we are the victims of our own desires, desires that weren't even ours initially, but became ours. And with this lack of appropriate direction in life, we, through our own awareness, have lost energy because the Dharma is just a system. It's a system between us and our relationship to that immortal truth, that immortal reality. And in the same way, our attitude towards truth determines our success. You remove that Dharma, you remove that vital truth, and now it's our relationship to impartialities. Things that do not contain truth in its whole form, but rather divide truth. And so with these divisions of truth, we're looking for this truth because it's inherent, right? That's why we've fallen into the arms of science instead of the arms of religion, because of this inherent need, this pull, right? This desire for purpose and for meaning, this desire for outcome, this desire for movement, right? This desire is here, but this desire has become misguided because we no longer have a reference for the divine. And so we become anchored in a very specific perception of life. And this perception is now the one factor that determines our quality of life. How much life we can live, how much life is available to us, how much we can even understand and comprehend about life. Everything is tailored. It's tailor-made to that one tiny dimension of reality. It's like the example Gurji said a long time ago. We've put all our money into this bank account, and then we forgot it existed. And we have $10 in our pocket, and we're trying to live our lives based upon these $10 that we have. Because we've forgotten the PIN code to our debit card, or we've lost our debit card. We never even knew we had one. That is perception. Perception determines our reality, and perception is that $10 or that $1 billion. Perception is what has limited science to that tiny droplet of water. Without the perception, the acknowledgement of that divine authority, we've disconnected science from the infinite wealth and resource of that knowledge. Now, the question is, what is the truth then? I know we've talked about truth and honesty on this call many times. And I see people sometimes misunderstand what that really means. Because truth and honesty, according to human nature, can be very different from truth and honesty in divine nature. Because you're working with this tiny sphere of perception. Truth evolves when you evolve. So oftentimes, when we're not properly understanding the teachings, we think that when we talk about truth, truth means exposing. That truth is about exposition. That if something happens and it's the truth, you should always say it as it is. I'll give you an example, and this is a true story. And it's a devastating story. It's not a happy story. There was a woman and her son in India, and they had a fight. And the boy ended up jumping out the window. He ran off of, the 20th story floor, however high it was. He died immediately. Now, this mother is so devastated, grieving, but not knowing what happened to her son. Is her son alive? Is her son dead? But seeing the state of that woman, is the truth to say your son has died? Is that truth? It's honest, but is it truth? Is it divine truth in that moment? Are you aligned with divine truth to go ahead and just expose? In that moment, that woman was so fragile mentally and emotionally that it was not appropriate for her mental health and for her sake to tell her, no, your son is already gone. Just to give her a fragment of hope, they said to her, collectively, everybody agreed. Nobody questioned for even a moment, should we tell her or not? Everybody agreed and said, they've taken him to the hospital. They didn't say if he was alive or dead. They just said, they've taken him to the hospital. We'll find out what happened. We'll keep watch. We'll keep track of him. There was some semblance of hope, some sense of, even though it wasn't pure honesty. What was it true to in that moment? It was true to the divine principles of Dharma. In that truth must be applied with wisdom to not cause more suffering, but to establish peace and reverence and love and compassion. That is the function of truth. That is our true nature. To not establish that truth is adharmic. It's against those divine principles that open the heart to compassion and love and grace. To not follow the heart's desire to console in that moment is denying the heart, is denying consciousness through the person who is applying that truth. You are denying yourself. You are denying a vital part within you. That is a pathway to divine itself. You are not pulling from that divine strength when you don't follow those principles. That's why I always say, whatever you think is correct can be different from what you feel and know is correct. And the true barometer for that is to determine how many thoughts are in your head. I heard the story a long time ago of this saint, who prioritized truth, honesty above all other qualities. And there were these men who were trying to find this group of travelers and kill them. And they begged, pleaded to the man, please don't tell them we're here. Right? We'll be on our way. Just do not tell him we're here. And instead, the man told the truth. They went that way. They went into the forest. These travelers were murdered. They were killed. And that man suffered such guilt and grief. He couldn't handle it and he killed himself. Even Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. There's another book called the Mahabharata, if I'm saying it correctly, and it's the epic tale. And part of that is, the story of Krishna and Arjuna, which goes into the Bhagavad Gita, which is just, the song of God. It's Krishna, giving Arjuna a pep talk on, yeah, you should kill these people. And here's why. It is your dharma. It is your duty. Well, right, this epic tale, right, talks about the whole battle and the whole situation. And it's the Kauravas versus the Pandavas, right? These two groups of people who are, were cousins, or, they were related to each other. And the Pandavas were in power at that time. And through deception and manipulation, out of jealousy, envy, the other family members were able to take control. They were able to trick the Pandavas into gambling away their kingdom. And they took control. And the whole story is this 18-day war that happens between the two of them. And you can look at it as an epic tale of the soul, right? The unconscious soul seeking unconsciously, its own enlightenment, its own awakening. And the Pandavas are the side of the Dharma. They fight for the Dharma, for the truth. And the Kauravas, they might not be all bad people, but they're ultimately on the wrong side, you could say, the side that goes against the Dharma. And so the right thing is not to follow your emotional inclinations. This is my family. I shouldn't kill them. Let them kill me. No, your duty is to uphold the Dharma. No one can kill anyone. That is only something divine can do. And even then, the soul, the Atman, it continues, it lives. You cannot burn it by fire, cut it by sword, wet it by water. It is untouched by whatever you do in the physical, even the mental. It is perfect, pristine, and always lives within that ocean of pure consciousness. You cannot have any influence over it. And the decision for that soul to separate from the illusion of the body, of the individual, is not something that's in your power. That's in God's authority and God's power. But you still must play your duty, your role perfectly in sustaining and upholding the divine truths, the divine principles and fundamentals. Because when you do that, you call forth this divine power. You are now a resource for that divine light in this world. You are establishing that divine truth. And in doing so, you are bringing this grace into this world and affecting the lives of all the others around you. It is not just about personal gain. It is about what is righteous and full of justice. It's not a tale for a pacifist. It's a tale of a dharmic warrior. which is another thing that society has gotten wrong so many times, is that the spiritual path is a path of solely pacifism. And while that might be part of it, that's not all of it. That sometimes it's about fighting a battle, a war, sometimes even literally, for the sake of upholding that Dharma. That is how important that Dharma is, that whatever it requires to uphold it, it must be followed as perfectly as possible. And so in this story, there's a story in which one of these, people, this man from the other side, who was considered a legendary warrior, who was like invincible, very difficult to beat. And the Pandavas had to battle him. They had to fight him. And he was nearly invincible, except his one weakness was his attachment to his son. And they knew that if they could use his attachment to his son, they could possibly trick him into thinking that his son had died. And in thinking his son had died, this man would lose hope. And he could be easily defeated then. And so Krishna, the highest embodiment of the Dharma, had told the Pandavas, he said, you have to convince him that his son has died. It sounds like a story of deception. But if you look at the vital truth behind it, if it's about upholding the Dharma, right, it is not about suppressing the truth, but rather how to appropriately express that truth. And so the tale goes that what he ended up doing is he convinced one of the, the brothers of the Pandavas, his name was Bhima. He convinced him, he told him, devised this plan where they were going to name an elephant after that man's son. And then they would behead the elephant. They would kill the elephant and then declare, your son has died, using his name without actually referencing his son. They would say, I think his name was Ashwatthama. They say, Ashwatthama's dead. And very quietly say, the elephant. But enough so that he would not hear them say the elephant. Because one of the brothers, his name was Yudhishthira, and he was, very honest man. And he was a little uncomfortable with lying to the man, lying to, this warrior and saying your son has died. So they found a way for him to still tell the truth, but the expression of that truth was enough to uphold the Dharma still. So Bhima killed the elephant. He said, Ashwatthama is dead. And the warrior said, what? And he didn't believe him initially. So he went to this other man, this man that he knew would speak the truth. And he said, Ashwatthama is dead, the elephant. And he was so devastated, so caught up in his emotions, and he didn't hear the quiet voice saying the elephant, that he fell down, he relinquished his sword, and they beheaded him. And it was a vital turning point in the battle. And then the story continues to go on. Obviously, the Pandavas, they regain control, they win the battle, the Dharma is upheld. And then the story, right, this is the full story, not just the story between the conversation between Arjuna and Krishna, but the story goes that the Pandavas, these brothers, right, now it's come to a point in which, it's the end of their reign over the kingdom, and now they're on a quest for moksha. And so they, begin traveling to the Himalayas. I think it was all 5 brothers. And during their travels, seeking heaven, eventually these brothers fall off one by one. Even Arjuna. Each one of them, dies on the path to heaven. And they die for different reasons. One of them, died because they, loved one of the brothers more than the others. One of them died because they, were full of pride. Another one dies because they were full of gluttony. One of them thought, Arjuna thought that, nothing could defeat him, that he was, invincible, all powerful, kind of little prideful there. And that's what caused his defeat in the end. All of them, just different qualities of the ego, really. But what the story is symbolic of is that each one of the brothers, or each one of the siblings, is a different layer of the ego that's shed on the way to moksha. Pride, gluttony, fear, So all that's left is the final, honest brother, Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira, sorry. And on his path, as all the brothers are walking initially, a dog joins them. And the dog continues with them all the way, up the Himalayas. And when it's just him left, Yudhishthira, he finally meets Indra, the god, the king of the gods, at the doors of moksha, the doors of heaven. And he says, you did it. You made it. You have attained. You are welcome to heaven in your living form. You don't have to die to go to heaven. It's like you can live and be in heaven now. He's like, all of your brothers, all your siblings, they had to die to reach moksha, but you are the one that made it while alive in this body. And you can be the first living being to enter heaven. He says, on one condition, you can't bring the dog with you. And him seeing this and realizing he couldn't bring the dog with him, he was like, but this dog has been loyal to me. This dog has trusted me and followed me all along this path. We've been a team. We've worked together. He's like, I will not go to a heaven that will not allow me, that will cause me to be disloyal to someone who has been so loyal to me in return. So in the face of losing his chances of heaven, he says no. And in the moment he says no, that he can't betray this dog, this being that has been so loyal and followed him to the very ends of the earth, immediately that dog transforms and turns into the god of Dharma. And they declared this was your final test. To enter into moksha, to enter into heaven, was to see if you would uphold the Dharma, if the Dharma was more important to you than heaven itself. And he succeeded. He was victor over that final trial. And so he goes into heaven, and immediately when he goes into heaven, he sees one of the warriors from the opposite party, on a throne there, enjoying the bliss and ecstasy of heaven, someone who was following adharmic principles, going against the Dharma, fighting on the unrighteous side of the battle. And he saw that, and he didn't see any of his siblings there. All of these men who fought and strived to uphold the Dharma, to uphold justice and righteousness and truth, who made sacrifices emotionally, mentally, physically in order to uphold the truth. And he saw instead this man was there on the throne. And he said, why is he here? Where are my brothers? Where are my siblings? And Indra told him, oh, they're in hell. And he was like, what? They're in hell? But I made it to heaven, but my brothers, my siblings are in hell who fought this battle for truth and justice? And even though he had a chance to enjoy that bliss of heaven, that ecstasy, he said, no, show me my brothers. Prove to me they're in hell. I don't believe you. And so he took him down hell. He said, bring me to hell. And he showed him hell and showed his brothers there suffering and pain and agony. And he said, let me stay here with them. He denied heaven, that bliss and that ecstasy, to stay with his companions in Dharma. Because in his mind, he could not live in a heaven that did not uphold those divine principles. Even heaven itself, even the bliss, the ecstasy of that personal enlightenment, that personal gain, that final desire, he could not live that. He said, I will deny heaven if the Dharma is not there. I will sacrifice even that for the Dharma. And upon that decision, the illusion of hell disappeared. And he found that, that man who was on the throne, he disappeared as well. And instead he saw all of his brothers, all of his siblings there with him, enjoying heaven. It was just another illusion, another trial. In our path of the Dharma and truth and honesty, our perception dictates that truth for us. When we have lost our own establishment in that divine connection. And without our adherence to that divine truth, we may believe we're following the Dharma. We may believe we're being honest and doing right. But because of our consciousness, we are actually following something a little more sinister that we are not even aware of. Some part of us that is closed off to human compassion and love and that truth. What truth is truly meant to establish. That opening of the heart, that opening of love in our lives. The Dharma is not just about following a law and waiting until death for moksha, for liberation, but it's being liberated now, right now. It's being liberated from our expectations. It's being liberated even from our personal attachments of what we think is right. Because I'm telling you, no matter what you think is right, it will never be right if you think it's right. The truth will never be perceived. Right? It's not because of your beliefs. It's nothing to do with your power or your strength that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. That's not your power. That's not something that you, through your mental capacity and your liberation and your self-effort, that you were able to figure that out. It's established already. It is objective outside of you. It is the ultimate truth. And your ability to conceive it and perceive it is not even yours. In the same way, you do not decide the moment you die, or even what pulls you onto this path, what causes enlightenment. Only enlightenment creates enlightenment. It has nothing to do with your self-efforts, your personal gain, your liberation, your accomplishment. We get stuck in accomplishment. We get stuck in doing. We get stuck in achieving. And in doing so, we entrap ourselves in the illusion of honesty. And we deny the other. We deny the existence of everything outside of ourselves. We deny the Dharma unknowingly and unwittingly. What is dharmic about telling a child who drew you a wonderful picture and gifted it to you, it's not a very good drawing? What is dharmic about that? It's honest. But what's dharmic about that? Is it truthful? The expression of truth requires wisdom. The wisdom behind that Dharma, that truth, says that for that child's capabilities, for what that child can do, and the fact that the child is doing something sincere and outside of itself to try and do something for someone else, that is a good drawing. There's nothing dishonest about it. Merely the expression of the truth is different. It's still truth. Truth and ahimsa, the action of nonviolence without causing harm and suffering to someone else. And I'm not talking about the harm of the offended ego. There's a difference between egoic suffering and true, real suffering. You could say all suffering is ego suffering, but there is a distinct difference between someone who's just merely insulted or offended and someone who sincerely suffers. And the more you awaken in consciousness, the more you can feel the difference immediately. The more one affects you and the other one doesn't. Especially when you follow the Dharma, then you feel. I remember the first time that happened to me. You can read 2 emails. They could be copy-paste, the exact same words written the exact same way. And someone with the sincerity or the real suffering behind it can make you weep uncontrollably. And the other one coming from a place of lack of sincerity, of maybe just the suffering on the level of the ego, the uncontrolled emotions, something that that person has just not had any level of desire to control. They've let it run rampant into their lives. They're applying no will, no discipline. They don't want to do anything to try and control or improve their lives, and they're simply complaining. The exact same words, exact same way it's said, an email without a face or even a name, and you can feel the difference immediately. In the same way, you read the words of the enlightened, and you read the words of someone who just understands the knowledge philosophically, and you feel the Shakti, you feel the energy, you feel those divine electrical currents, the bliss, the love that just penetrates right into your heart, gives you a shock to your system. You feel it immediately, and you know that that person is connected to truth. And someone who doesn't have that established connection in that Dharma themselves, in that truth, they can't tell the difference. They don't feel it. They don't notice it. They get confused. They lack that clarity, that acuity of feeling. They say the greatest gift for any person is a strong opponent. So long as you are on this path and you are doing your vital best, your utmost ability to follow the Dharma, to follow the truth, you're using your full discriminatory faculties. Whether you truly have them or not, you're trying your best to follow it. You're trying your best to uphold the Dharma. You're trying your best to uphold peace and purity and innocence, to maintain your own purity and innocence of being, to not get rooted in hatefulness and spitefulness, to not accrue emotional degradation, to become jaded or closed-minded, to allow yourself to devolve to a point in consciousness where you no longer have compassion and love for others, but rather you work hard to uphold that Dharma so that you can be fruitful in this life, that you can endure. And in your endurance, cause the flowering of others as well. Because you're not fighting for yourself, nor are you really fighting for them, but you're fighting for the Dharma. You're fighting for peace. You're fighting for love. You're fighting for truth. Personal gain be damned. You're fighting for justice. The justice of love to persevere, not the justice of punishment and reward. The justice of love, the justice of peace, in which we are all a part of. To coddle, to pamper an ego does not mean you should deny a compliment. I've seen people here get confused. When Guruji said no pampering, suddenly people stopped saying anything good altogether about anybody else for fear of pampering. That is also denying the truth. When you lack reverence, when you lack the appreciation and the gratitude of acknowledging a good quality in someone else, for acknowledging when someone did a good job, for acknowledging when someone else upheld the Dharma and did something perfectly or something to the highest of qualities, to not acknowledge that is to deny that quality altogether in your own life. And I've seen people do that. Someone cooked an excellent meal and nobody said a word. And I would make extra sure in those moments to say, this food is excellent. The pampering and the coddling is for someone who is so out of control, so lacking the discipline, the self-effort to truly transform themselves with this boon of this energy, where they have unlimited capacity of transformation, but they don't put in the discipline to control their mind, to control their emotions, to sacrifice their own personal gain, their own personal ambitions for the sake of the Dharma. Maybe giving someone else the credit for once, maybe giving something to someone else even though you really want it. In that moment, saying nothing's wrong when there is something wrong. Letting someone who maybe is a sincere seeker on the path, who really wants to evolve themselves and to transform, and denying them the truth for the sake of offending their ego. The truth requires discretion. The truth requires wisdom. Wisdom comes from the soul's relationship, the soul's attitude, the soul's ability to apprehend the Dharma. It's our perception that refracts that truth, refracts our ability to feel and understand the Dharma. And it is only through, right? That is why we have the 8-step path. That is why we have the yogic path. We have the yams and the niyams, right? The do's and the don'ts. And then you have all the nuanced steps after that. You have the path of focused concentration. You have the path of meditation. You have all these things that are required because Krishna was talking about the path of the Dharma and the nature of reality, saying that all of us, we are all trapped in our own personal hells and heavens and our own personal perceptions of truth. If you actually look at this world, right, whatever we see as objective truths, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, right, these principles and fundamentals that nature upholds, these natural laws. Well, if you actually look at it, if you alter your perception even more, you understand that even these natural laws that are limited to planet Earth change the moment you leave planet Earth. Is your weight not different on planet Mars than it is on planet Earth? The principles of weight no longer apply. The principles of gravity changed. The principles of all these different supposedly universal principles change the moment you leave the atmosphere of this Earth. In the same way, the moment you leave the atmosphere of your individual perception, these principles and fundamentals naturally change. They alter. And when you're stuck in identity, when you're stuck in your own personal world, and we lose sight of that ocean, that divine presence, and we don't call on that as a resource to fill our reservoirs, you can imagine how easy it is to make a mistake and follow a path that goes against the Dharma and drop in consciousness. Even when you're sincere. When you look at leaving planet Earth and suddenly the natural laws start to change, well, think about it on a personal level with your personal world, your personal Earth, and the laws that isolate you within your perception, within your awareness. Well, when we forget about God in life and society, and it's not something that is accepted universally anymore, right? You see our society starting to devolve and change and decline, fall into a state of disrepair, where solutions are no longer viable or existent. Well, it's that problem with identity, that our perception is so confined to this limited self and this lack of acknowledgement of the divine. Not even acknowledgement, but in our ability to root ourselves and suffuse our consciousness with that divine consciousness. As Krishna was saying in the Bhagavad Gita, everybody has their own personal worlds, their personal heaven and hells. And we're limited to these spheres, these little earths, these different worlds, these separate worlds of understanding and perception and reality. Even reality changes in the same way on that planet Earth, right? These fundamental laws change the moment you go outside of the bounds of Earth. Well, in the same way you go outside of the bounds of the personal self, and reality changes. Things that you perceive to be true, these so-called natural laws for you in your life, suddenly evolve and change and transform. Now, Krishna was discussing all these different, methods by which we use to connect to that truth, that Dharma, outside of our personal truths. The biggest problem we face is that, isolation, that sense of personal identity when we forget about the divine, when we've lost contact, when we have lost that establishment in the existence of God, the existence, the understanding, the comprehension, that is the source, not just of a subjective, spiritual, esoteric experience of life, but rather of life itself, of vitality and prosperity, of mental health, of peace, of all of these components in life that makes life worth living, all stem from and come through. They all flourish through that divine presence. That is the medium of goodness and health and life. That is the medium of well-being. That is the medium by which all things prosper and come forth. And so we lost this vital part. And so we rely heavily upon the individual part, our individual roles, our individual perspectives. Where Dr. Viktor Frankl explained that purpose must exist outside of ourselves. He said that purpose, when he saw purpose was limited up to personal experience and personal gain, these people also did not live long. They did not thrive. They died quickly too. It was those who lived outside of personal gain, those who were living for someone else, those who were living to do some good, who were living for a higher purpose outside of themselves. Those were the people that lasted the longest. Those were the people that, under the same exact circumstances as everybody else, somehow made it longer. And we're not talking days, we're talking months, maybe even years. A year. A significant difference. Well, when we have lost this spiritual dimension of life, this sense of we are all here, and the one thing that connects us is this divinity, this sense of a higher part of life that we can connect to and call forth. And we rely instead upon our own abilities, our own strengths, our own capacities. And these, no matter what we do in life, will either fall short, will disappoint. Even after years of giving us success, one day they will fail. And the moment they fail, your world will come crashing around you. Those who rely on beauty have to understand that beauty goes away with age. Those who rely heavily on their mental abilities will find that suddenly they get Alzheimer's. Suddenly they lose their comprehension ability or their clarity of thought. They'll suddenly become forgetful. Their memory will start to fade. Everyone who relies on what they consider their own qualifications of purpose and meaning instead of the qualifications set forth by the divine will always see them fail, if not now, eventually, because that is the nature of the personal self, is to eventually dissolve. The illusion changes. It will never remain the same. Those who are beautiful will age. Those who are smart won't be smart anymore. Things will always differ. Those who have good health will lose their good health. Those who have money will suddenly gamble it all the way or will lose it. Someone will steal it from them. Someone they trust. There will always be something that happens, or they'll have so much money, they'll always be afraid of losing it, that they'll never get to truly enjoy it. There will always be something. In the realm of the personal, there'll always be one final something that disconnects, that prevents you from truly feeling happy or at peace, that will truly prevent you from feeling the true ecstatic nature of existence, the true wealth of love and bliss and happiness that is actually out there. There'll always just be that one layer left. And you'll know it, you'll feel it, because it's just something will never be quite enough. You'll always want more, and in the wanting of more, you'll never find fulfillment. You'll think, if I can just have this, if I can just establish myself in the world, if I can just fulfill the lives of my children, if I could just somehow, become great in my job and, do this job well, if I can somehow, fulfill my role perfectly, in this way, if I could just somehow do that, there will always be a block at some point in time or another. The moment that that is achieved, it loses the illusion of the glamour behind it. Because that's not where fulfillment lies. It's the same thing. Those who try a drug and they experience a high and they lose the high, they want it again. But the problem is you never experienced the high the same way you did that very first time you had it. And so you need more and you need more to try and attain the same level that you'd had before until eventually everything's a mess. You're unhappy, you're miserable, you're suffering. But some people just need to experience, they need to go through those motions to reach that level of understanding because the greatest teacher is experience. It's not philosophical language, it's not theory, it's not, teachings from books or teachers in a classroom. It's from experience itself. Some people need to fall so hard so that they can let go of all of what they believe is true or righteous or their own principles, whatever they are attached to. Just consider this for a moment. If you look at the mind and the body, right? Because our body is, that connection we have to this outer world, this perceptual world. So we identify with the body. We become very stuck into it. We can't picture what we would be without this face, without our thoughts, without our beliefs, without our family, without our experiences. We don't know what life would be. What could you possibly comprehend about yourself outside of these things? It's impossible. You can't. We become so identified with the body. But when you look at the nature of the mind, right, when we go into subtler energy fields, right, we look at the body as a grosser field of energy, and then we look at things getting subtler and finer when we're going into refined states of consciousness, refined aspects of being, where we enter into the mind. And in this refined state, although it can identify with the body, what you often see is it can also detach itself from the body. It can have experiences outside of your physical location. Out of your current life experiences, you can dream and think and conceive of things that you aren't currently living right now. It's true, we could call them delusions because in reality, anything that's perceived is a delusion. Anything. Even the highest perception is a delusion because it's still based upon the individual. But it's still an interesting point to recognize that sitting here with eyes closed, you can picture yourself, you can imagine yourself to be someone else, living a different life, doing different things. You can dream and invent things that never were. You can do things with the mind that are not limited to this physical location or this physical experience or this physical identity. Showing that at the very least, the nature of the mind is not tied to the physical. It supersedes it, it goes before it. Well, Krishna says that within the mind, right, the mind is multifaceted. It has infinite dimensions within it. It is not one way. The mind is capable, so vast and so complex. I've said it, all the supercomputers in the world cannot map out one human mind, one human brain, with all the neurons and the way they interconnect. Well, think of consciousness, what that's capable of, refined even further. As we evolve in consciousness, we see that our ability to detach ourselves from this individual experience increases. It becomes easier for us. Neuroplasticity is the ability of the mind to, rewire and change its connections. Well, in order to do that, we also have to be able to detach from these old connections. In a state of deep samadhi, deep meditation, naturally the brain is rewiring itself because every time you come out of it, you can feel a difference. Suddenly you're less reactive. Your perception changes. You're more loving, or you just see and feel something different, a different quality of life that wasn't there before. It's like a part of you has detached from one experience of life and has instead moved into a new experience that wasn't there before, that is qualitatively very different. That is the divine power in our lives. That when we establish ourselves in that through deep, deep meditation, when we find the stillness, the epicenter of our minds, at the very center, the very heart of our minds and our beings is a single pointedness that leads to stillness. Because if there's anything we know about that which is manufactured, you can always find the manufacturer's fingerprints in whatever they manufactured. They'll always brand it, they'll put a logo on it, they'll do something. You can always trace it back to the manufacturer. Within the mind, within these infinite facets, which is really just consciousness with a structure, a manufactured consciousness. Well, if you go deeper into the recesses, if you go deeper, right, it's like the ocean, right, the very surface level of the ocean, very turbulent, full of lots of waves, right? If you're only here at the surface level, life seems very turbulent. It seems like there's a lot happening. It seems like life is a very specific way, but when you go deeper into the deeper depths of the ocean, you find an incredible stillness that's happening simultaneously as those wild waves atop it. And that stillness, when you go deep enough, it is not influenced or touched upon by those waves. It stays that way. It is permanently still. There is a part of consciousness that is always there within yourself, right? The manufacturer. There is always something that resides there that is permanently still. You don't have to make it still. It already is stillness. And when we're sincere and we're looking for that, when that's what we want, right? When we align ourselves with the highest ideal, we divert ourselves, we try our best to follow the Dharma. What happens naturally is our beings begin to purify. We become more innocent and pure. And what this innocence and purity is, right? It's not naivety. What innocence and purity is unadulterated consciousness. It's consciousness without the additional mental modifications of perception. Purity is in a moment when there's chaos happening around you to be connected with love and stillness and grace, to see the beauty behind every moment. That's purity, to see the truth, to be so pure in consciousness that amongst those turbulent waves, you reside permanently. You adhere in that deep stillness of the ocean, unaffected. Because the mind can detach. It can go deep, deep into that ocean until eventually it stays there. And you can't separate it. And that's enlightenment. Complete permanent suffusion with that light, that ocean of light. In that permanent stillness, and you remain unaffected by anything else. And it's not something you have to force. It's not even something you have to discipline or make happen. You don't have to detach yourself. It's just something that you are now. It controls you. You're just unaffected. Right? If you suddenly get those $1 billion, what do you care if you lose a penny? You probably wouldn't even notice. It's like you're in the room with the sun and a bunch of people are fighting over whose candle is the brightest. You don't even notice. It's just so insignificant that it doesn't even matter to you. And those who don't understand can call you ignorant, or they can call you naive, or they can insist that you're maybe immature, you're not taking life seriously, you don't get it. When in reality, you probably get it more than anybody else. You're just unbothered because you live in that perfection all the time. And it can be very scary for some people. People can perceive it with hostility instead and think, what's their ulterior motive? What do they really want? What are they really thinking? Because they can't apprehend, they can't pin you down. They feel the infinitude of the consciousness behind the body and the face, but they don't understand it on an intellectual level. And because they're still in control by their ego, by their intellect, they try and understand it. And their way of understanding it is through their own experiences of life. And if they've, had a lot of people who have been tricky with them, they'll always see people as being tricky. They'll be like, there's something tricky about this person. They're deceptive, they're evil, they're manipulative. There's something mean, or they're jealous, or they're volatile. There's something just, I can't pin it down, but I can sense it. I can feel it from them. And you're just feeling your own consciousness, because that's all you can do is feel your own consciousness. When there's an emotion behind it, you are only feeling yourself, because that is what an emotion is. Emotion is a personal reflection of how you perceive reality, and it has nothing to do with anybody else. Nobody can make an emotion happen for you. Only you can do that. An emotion is your own perception of reality. And if you are suffering from horrible emotions, you have to assess your perception and what are you missing from the Dharma to establish that peace and purity and vibrancy in your life again. This whole discourse just came to me this morning because I came across a YouTube video of an AI Bible story where AI, it's, something that they're doing with AI where they're recreating the Bible stories. They're creating like kind of like movies or pictures of the stories from the Bible. And I was seeing all these scenes from the Old Testament, and I'm just, incredible, absolutely incredible. And I just happened to come across the story of David and Goliath, and you see this small David. I'm like, that's what I'm going to talk about today. David and Goliath. For those of you who don't know the story of David and Goliath, it's one of my favorite stories from the Bible. One of them. And it's a story about, it was the Philistines versus the Israelites, right? Another big epic battle. And the Israelites were not doing very well. The Philistines, had this incredible warrior, another incredible warrior called Goliath. He was like a 9-foot tall giant, huge, muscular man, with his armor all over and this big sword and shield. And he was, ready. He was like, he wanted a personal battle. He wanted to fight off all of the Israelites. He said, I want someone to battle me. I want one person, anybody who can take me down. He was challenging people, mocking them and saying, anybody who can fight me. And so, of course, his army, was, very confident and hopeful and inspired. And the Israelites, were full of fear and terror. Just looking at this giant, they're like, how are we going to battle this person? It's impossible. They were like, it's impossible. Nobody can defeat him. Look at him. Look at his size. Look at his stature. Look at the power and the strength he has. Who can fight off this man and win? Well, little David, right? He's a little shepherd boy. And his father wants him, right, not to fight Goliath, but he wants him to deliver food to his brothers who are in, that army who was facing the Philistines. And so he is taking this food, to his brothers. And then he sees Goliath there. And he decides, I'll fight you. I'll challenge you. And Goliath is there laughing at him, like this little boy, smaller than all the other men in the army, this little tiny boy. And he's so confident, thinking he can win, he can fight me, this 9-foot tall giant. And Goliath is like, it's not me. I'm not going to defeat you. The God Almighty is going to put your head in my hands. And confidently, without any fear, he has his slingshot and he takes 5 stones. And then he takes one, slings it at the giant, hits him right in the forehead, and he sinks right into his forehead and he falls down dead. And of course, the rest of the army sees this and is shocked, appalled, and they run in fear, thinking if they can defeat Goliath, oh my God, we have no chance. And so the rest of the army flees. And the Israelites, are suddenly they regain their hope and their confidence. And then they run forward and they're like, yeah, we win the battle. All because of little David with his slingshot. Well, a lot of the stories in the Bible, a lot of people miss this point, is that the stories of the Bible, whether they're real or not, I'm not going to go into that. But what I will say is that the Bible is truly meant to be read intuitively. Your soul, your spirit is meant to read and interpret these stories in the Bible. They are anecdotes of deeper truths. They're not just stories of real life events that someone has dictated and written down. They are anecdotes of the soul's journey, the soul's path to divine, to enlightenment. And Goliath is this huge ego self that mocks us, that laughs at us, that says we're incapable, we're incompetent. He was saying to David, I'm going to dismember you and feed you to the dogs. Feed your flesh to the dogs. You don't stand a chance. He's laughing at this little boy, but the boy's unfazed. The Israelites, they're under fear. They're terrified. That's the mind, the thoughts in the mind. That the ego has such influence over the thoughts in our mind that our thoughts themselves prevent us from taking action, from taking a risk. Possibly they could have defeated Goliath themselves. Who knows? But they were so paralyzed by their fear. The mind was so paralyzed by its thoughts that it couldn't even bring itself to battle. And David, the soul, the spirit, the part of ourselves that is permanently rooted in that divine presence, right? The shepherd, it's a symbolic representation saying that the shepherding of our thoughts, right? The role of the shepherd is to guide the sheep, right? Is to divert them, is to direct them towards the field, the pastures of green grass, direct them to the water, direct them at home, to stand guard and protect these sheep. In the same way, the story is saying we must do the same things with our own perception, our own thoughts, our own minds. But it's through the soul that we gain the power, the faculties of our mind to be able to do that. That through the strength, the adherence of the soul with the divine, by calling forth the power from there, we have the power to defeat even the most impossible of enemies, because in reality, nothing is impossible in front of the divine. You have an infinite reservoir of strength. It is not limited. It is self-effulgent. It's capable of anything. Your presence in this life is also self-effulgent. Consciousness through you is managing your own life. You're not doing anything additional to make that happen. But when we've disconnected ourselves from that source, we limit our own power. We become entrapped in lower states of consciousness, in lower vibrations, right, in lower oscillations. And as a result, our mental capacity is diminished, our clarity of thought, our discretion, our discernment, right? The discriminatory faculties of the mind to discern between truth and falsehood is reduced to nothingness. We can't differentiate between the truth and what is illusion, what is just our perception, what is a lie our minds are telling us. Our own perception is persuading us. The ego, the Goliath, and the Israelites feeling like they can't do anything about it. They're struck down, they're defeated before the battle even begins. Now, there's also a symbolic meaning behind those 5 stones, right? It's not just, right? It took just 1 stone to really defeat Goliath, but he picked up 5 stones. And Vibi has a slide on this. Here, David chooses 5 smooth stones from a river, a detail rich in spiritual meaning. These stones represent the divine qualities necessary to overcome the ego. The first smooth stone is faith, Shraddha, absolute trust in divine guidance. The second is discrimination, Viveka, the wisdom to discern truth from illusion. The third, inner strength, Dhairya, not diarrhea. Phoebe can help me with the pronunciation. Duh. Whatever he said. Daria, right? Comic relief. Produced by yours truly. I'll just say inner strength. The courage to act righteously despite challenges. Right? It's like the story of, the Mahabharata, where you must even relinquish any concept of personal gain in order to act righteously. Whatever challenges you face, even the challenges of personal ambition, you must have the inner strength to even forego that. Number 4, the 4th stone is meditation, dhyan, the focused concentration that stills the mind. And then, of course, the 5th stone, divine love, prema, the power that dissolves fear and separation from God. Now, these 5 stones, David picked up from a river, right? From a pond. It's symbolic in that they're smooth, because we don't start off with these qualities being perfect and smooth and ready for the plucking already. It takes time. And what smooths these stones over is that water. The nature of water smooths these stones over and makes them perfect. That with our sincerity, and the more we try and cultivate these characters, the more we act upon them, the more we direct our awareness, right? We follow the Dharma, we direct our awareness and focus on developing these characters in our lives. These characters, right? That divine grace that comes through, that evolves us when we follow the Dharmic principles and fundamentals, when we follow the truth, right? We harness more of this divine grace. This divine grace is this river. It is this water that polishes these stones on our behalves, making them smooth, making them perfect. Ultimately, we have to have this river running through us to be able to smooth these qualities over. But trust me when I say they'll take care of itself. That love grows. You don't need to worry. You're like, I don't have this love of God. But even from my own experience as a child growing, I had a significant love of God, but that love grew and it was beyond my control. It was something God did for me. That love grew more and more. I was like, I thought I loved God before, but wow, this love is a new level, something beyond what I thought I was even capable of before. By comparison, I would say I didn't love God. If this is that love now, and I didn't have to practice a methodology or a trick. It was something that just evolved through that grace over time. The more I used that love, right? It's like using a muscle. And what happens when you're working out a muscle, you have to always use, right, a weight, use an opponent, use something else that's greater than your capacity. Right? If it's easy for you to use a 5-pound dumbbell, do you want to develop muscles, bigger muscles with that same 5-pound dumbbell? No, you move on. You increase the weight. You go to 10 pounds, then 15, then 20, 50. Eventually, you're bench pressing hundreds and hundreds of, well, maybe not hundreds. Bench pressing much more than I could possibly say, because I don't bench press anything. I don't have that experience. I bench press love. Right? The greater the opponent, that Goliath, the more we use these qualities to establish the Dharma, no matter what challenge or opposition we face, the more we cultivate these characters. The more we use them, the bigger they grow. The more you want or need love in a situation that requires it and calls for it, you go within to that stillness, that silent epicenter of consciousness itself, knowing that that is your true nature, that that is the divine. You call upon it with the love, right? Oil pulls oil, love pulls love. You go into that with love in your heart. You call forth from it with love. It pulls that love forth from that consciousness, from that divinity. And you now have this reservoir of love capable of accomplishing any trial that requires that love. Anybody who has a lot of challenges in life, be grateful, because these challenges are ways of growing. They're ways of expanding ourselves. If you know how to use them, these challenges is your greatest boon in life. It's not a challenge that causes suffering. It's our inability to address a challenge that causes suffering. And as we know, there is no inability to address a challenge. There's just the lack of motivation and desire to address a challenge. It's not important enough to us yet. We have to experience more of life until we experience a call unlike any other, where no matter what, nothing will fulfill us except for the divine. Discrimination, the more you use discrimination, the more you're on this search for truth and applying it, using it, implementing it, the more that muscle grows. The more you begin to recognize and understand. And the more even your experiences evolve and they change with your change in consciousness. You gain new experiences and it gives you new perspectives, which applied to that discrimination gives you new vantage points by which to apply those faculties of discrimination. What you thought was truth before has now evolved and changed because your world has changed. So never look down on someone for having challenges. Sometimes those people are the luckiest to have that challenge, especially when they know how to use it. Until eventually you're so established in that peace that the challenge itself cannot bring you out of it. And then you realize, true peace does not come from controlling my life or trying to curate my existence, but rather it's the effects of that presence, that ocean. It's that droplet that's finally just dissolved itself completely. And now the same face, the same name, the same personality, but the peace never goes away. You can lose power, but enlightenment is never lost. You can never lose enlightenment. That is permanent. If you're afraid of losing something, it's not enlightenment. It's all ego still. So you could see that the mission, our mission, Guruji's mission, right? Creating this scientific foundation, you can, look at it as a small thing, like, what is the benefit, right? It doesn't change whether God's real or not, so why do we need to prove it scientifically? But like I said, if society's success and its ability to prosper depends on its attitude towards truth, if we can scientifically create a foundation for that truth that's based and rooted in divine principles and fundamentals, where we finally acknowledge God and divine not as a subjective experience for only spiritual people, or maybe delusional people, as some people see it, but rather as an objective reality that cannot be questioned anymore. Where we can change the direction we're headed, the trajectory of civilization, when we can change our medicine, our technology, our agriculture, when we can produce like what Guruji is doing with these crops, this chicken, right, these eggs, when we can restore vitality through divine grace, through the grace of God. Just like David, rooted in that divine presence, can overcome Goliath, we can overcome all of humanity's most pressing problems. All of the challenges we face today is a simple, easy solution for God. These challenges are not too great, they're not too big, they're not too impossible. The amount of challenges we face is insignificant. Remember, it's just our capacity to evolve. It's the calling forth of spirit. When we see the amount of people that are suffering and the amount of people that are gaining awareness of suffering, that is significant, because the awareness of suffering is a doorway to truth. Because the more we acknowledge and understand that we are suffering, the more we are motivated to move out of it. The more we understand there's something off, the more we are willing to try something new, to take a step in a good direction. We are gaining awareness of how off the path we have been for so long, and understanding that something needs to change. We might not collectively know what, but we do know that what we're doing now is the foundation of that change that will take place in the future. That we are leaving a legacy on this planet, that Guruji is establishing God once more in our society. That God is not dead, but God is alive and thriving. So let us all be warriors of truth, of Dharma in our own lives. Let us fight for those divine principles. Let us know that when we pull from that strength, when we follow the yogic path, right, we still the mind to the point where we can focus it and enter into that epicenter. We can command the mind, command our thoughts by following the Dharma, by cultivating these characters. And these characters, when we follow these divine principles, these dharmic laws, we automatically become more receptive to these divine blessings. We can harness more grace. We can utilize more of this power to influence our lives, the lives of others, to make change happen, to overcome the Goliaths of our lives without getting confused of the semantics of truth. We can actually live in that truth. We can establish peace and happiness and wellness and prosperity in our lives. Not even for our personal gain, but for the sake of righteousness, for the sake of what's right. In the glory of God. So if you can't fight for yourself, at least fight for that. I find many spiritual people, when it comes to fighting for themselves, they're a little more flaky. But when you uphold yourself to a higher ideal, a higher motivator, these people are more inspired. They're more motivated. And I know you fall into that group. You're no longer fighting for yourself. You're fighting to uphold the Dharma. There's nothing that's too great or impossible for the soul to conquer. So I hope that brings you peace. I hope you leave this inspired and motivated, with fresh eyes and a fresh heart, and ready to bring forth those qualities that uplift instead of demean and conquer.